Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Andrew Jackson, and the focus is serial duelist. Duels were a part of life in early American history where issues of honor were often settled on the dueling ground, and Andrew Jackson was a frequent participant in this way of solving disputes. Look, it was part of who Andrew Jackson was. He was thin-skinned, he was defiant, he was principled, he was aggressive, he was fearless, and he never gave in. Some of this also might have dated back to this letter that his mother wrote him just before she died with some advice about how to live his life. And part of that said, avoid quarrels as long as you can without yielding to imposition, but sustain your manhood always. Never bring a suit at law for assault and battery or for defamation. The law affords no remedy for such outrages that can satisfy the feelings of a true man. If there's defamation, somebody defames you, don't go to the law for that. Andrew Jackson would take that under his own authority to try to resolve. And in this episode, we're going to cover 4 such instances, 4 duels or duel-like events over a 25-year period of time, beginning in 1788. Jackson's just 21 years old. He's a first-year lawyer out in the Western District of North Carolina, where he's trying a case against a much more experienced attorney by the name of Waightstill Avery. And Avery made some sort of sarcastic remark during the course of the trial that went against how Jackson was trying his case, and Jackson took great offense. He scribbled off a note of complaint to Avery, and that wasn't enough. And so the next day, he wrote out a challenge. My character you have injured, and further you have insulted me in the presence of a court and large audience. I therefore call upon you as a gentleman to give me satisfaction for the same. And I further call upon you to give me an answer immediately without equivocation, and I hope you can do without dinner until the business done. Not only did he challenge him to a duel, he wanted it done right away. Now, Avery was an experienced attorney, this upstart. He didn't want to deal with a duel here, but he also wasn't going to back away from a challenge in his honor, so he agreed to meet. Fortunately, their seconds made an arrangement so that this would not be a deadly fight. In fact, when the time to fire came, both shot their bullets in the air, and after that, they went about their business and even became kind of friendly going forward in Jackson's first effort at a duel. Go more than a decade later and things get a little bit more serious. Jackson has just wrestled away from the governor of the state, John Sevier, the top spot in the militia in the state of Tennessee. He becomes the major general, and the governor really wanted that spot. And the governor also wasn't happy with Judge Jackson, he's a judge at the time, who had seemed to rule against him in a case where Sevier was charged with fraud. He thought that there was some political motivation in some of Jackson's ruling. There was some bad blood that was really steaming between these two, and it all came to a head in October of 1803, where the two met in the public square of the state capital of Knoxville. In this case, it was the governor who came forward first with a verbal assault against Jackson, and Jackson defended himself, citing numerous services that he had done for his state. When Sevier came back and said, services? I know of no great service you rendered the country except taking a trip to Natchez with another man's wife. Attacking Rachel Jackson, this was unforgivable to Jackson, who said, great God, do you mention her sacred name? Shots were fired, no one was hit. Things were finally calmed, but a duel was certainly in the offing. Jackson issued the challenge. The governor said no, in that dueling was illegal in the state of Tennessee. Well, Jackson wasn't going to take that as an excuse, so he went to the press and he wrote out for all the public to see, know ye that I, Andrew Jackson, do pronounce, publish, and declare to the world that His Excellency, John Sevier, Esquire, Governor, Captain General and Commander-in-Chief of the Land and Naval Forces of the state of Tennessee, is a base coward and poltroon. He will basely insult, but has not the courage to repair the wound. Well, that was good enough. The duel was on. They were going to meet in Southwest Point, Virginia, just on the other side of the border. Jackson and his second, Thomas Van Dyke, arrived first, and they sat and they waited. And they waited some more. The governor was delayed by state business, and so after 2 days, Jackson and Van Dyke gave up. They're on the road back to Tennessee when, sure enough, they run into the governor and his son James in a town of Kingston, Tennessee, right outside that town. Well, Jackson immediately jumps off his horse, both guns ready to go, and Sevier calls him an assassin, like he was laying in wait. He jumps down, pistols are there, swords are brought out as well by the seconds, a lot of cursing and damning and shouting, but no shots were fired. Eventually, things subside and everyone goes about their business. This did not bring credit to any of the individuals involved. As the story went out, obviously one-sided from either side or the other. Notorious, yes, but credit? Not really. But at least no one was hurt in this duel. The next one would not be such the case. And that would take place just a couple of years later, and it would be the result of a horse race. In this case, Jackson was actually very fond of horses. He loved to ride them, he loved to raise them, and he loved to race them. And he had a prize horse named Truxton, who won him a lot of money in some stakes races. And he was challenged by a gentleman by the name of Joseph Irvin, who put his stallion Plowboy up against Truxton in a $2,000 stakes race, big bucks. And there was an $800 clause if you wanted to opt out before the race began. Well, there's going to be a big affair. Lots of people were coming. There's going to be a lot of gambling on the race when Irvin actually did decide to back out. He said, you know what, maybe we can't beat Truxton. I'll just pay the $800 and go about my business. But then things got a little squirrely because Irvin tried to change his promissory note, the original one that he sent, and substitute a new one. Jackson said no, he's sticking with the first one, and things eventually got resolved and seemed to be okay. But some of Jackson's followers thought that Irvin was trying to pull some shenanigans with the whole promissory note and started talking about him behind his back in town. And he found out about it, as did his son-in-law, Charles Dickinson, who took great offense of this, as did another local by the name of Thomas Swann. Now, Swann didn't have any direct impact on this, but he again was sort of trying to make a name for himself, and he wrote a bit of a challenge to Jackson because they claimed that Jackson was the source of these disreputable comments about Irvin. Well, Jackson knew that Swann wasn't the one who was really causing the problem. It was really Dickinson. So in his response to Swann, he said quite simply that as he, Dickinson, wishes to blow the coal, I am ready to light it to a blaze that it may be consumed at once and finally extinguished. At all times be assured I hold myself answerable for any of my conduct, and should anything herein contained give Mr. Dickinson the spleen, I will furnish him with an anodyne. Again, a duel was clearly in the offing, and Dickinson took the bait. He called Jackson a coward in his response, and they were set to meet. First, Jackson decided to deal with Swann. He tracked him down in a local tavern and simply caned him to get him out of the way. Then it was May 30th, 1806, they decided to meet on the dueling ground, Harrison's Mill in Logan County, Kentucky. Dickinson was by far the better marksman, and Jackson, for all of his bluster, had never actually fired a shot in his duels before. So there they stood, 24 feet apart, pistols down. Thomas Overton was Jackson's second. He gave the command to fire. Jackson just stood there. He apparently wanted to wait for Dickinson, the better marksman, to take the first shot. So Dickinson shot. When the smoke cleared, Jackson was standing there still erect. He had barely moved, and Dickinson couldn't believe that he missed, and he started to walk off his line. Well, his Jackson's second, Overton, ordered him back to his spot where he stood, and a grim-faced Jackson took aim, pulled the trigger, and nothing happened. Turned out that the hammer had only been half cocked, so he recocked his weapon, fired again, and he hit Dickinson just below the ribs. The wound was mortal. He bled out in a matter of a few hours. The 27-year-old was dead. Andrew Jackson did not come out of this unscathed. He was hit. He was hit by Dickinson's bullet. In fact, it was just inches from his heart, shattered against his breastbone and rib cage. But the pure willpower of Andrew Jackson was evident to absorb that blow without any indication that he had been hit, and then to go through with his side of the duel and take his fire and take the life of Charles Dickinson. Another lesson to the world: if you're going to come after Andrew Jackson, this time he not only was willing to be on the dueling ground, but to take a bullet that would stay in him for the rest of his life, it never came out, and do mortal damage to his enemy, in this case of Charles Dickinson. Well, the fourth tale in our saga is another decade forward, is actually during the War of 1812, and Jackson is a major general of the Tennessee militia. He is now taking his troops back from their first assignment, and there was a bit of a fracas in the ranks where a young man by the name of Jesse Benton and a major on Jackson's staff by the name of William Carroll got into it, and what do? Challenge each other to a duel. Well, Carroll asked Jackson to be his second. Originally, he said no, but then he asked him again, and he eventually said yes. And sure enough, they met on the dueling ground between Jesse Benton and William Carroll, and it was an odd duel. They actually started out facing the other way, and when the command was given, they were supposed to turn and fire. Well, somehow in all of this, the shot from Carroll to Benton gets into his derriere. And this is humiliating to Jesse Benton. And the one who's really upset is his older brother, Thomas, who was also a member of Jackson's military staff. And Thomas Benton, the future U.S. Senator from Missouri, Thomas Benton blamed Jackson for the whole thing. And he wrote him a note. He cursed him out. Jackson wasn't going to take this from anyone. And while a duel was not officially challenged, this was going to be a tense period the next time they got together. And sure enough, Jackson heard that the Bentons were going to be in Nashville staying at the City Hotel. And so he brought some of his friends and he was eyeing the front of the hotel. As the story goes, he walked to the post office to get his mail, walked back, had his eyes on the door, and sure enough, Thomas Benton was in the door. Jackson's getting closer, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, he pulls out his riding whip and is ready to smash it over the head of Thomas Benton. When Jesse Benton pulls out his revolver, shoots Jackson not once but twice. He's hit in the left arm, the left shoulder. He falls to the ground. Again, a wild fracas ensues. More shots, more stabbings, but by far, the one who gets the brunt of this is Andrew Jackson. He is brought to the nearby Nashville Inn. He's hemorrhaging blood. He bleeds through 2 mattresses before the bleeding finally stops. The doctors recommend amputation of his left arm, and Jackson, who's in and out of consciousness, simply says to the doctor, "I'll keep my arm." And so they did not amputate, but he was out. Rachel comes, she takes care of him for 3 weeks it takes before he's sort of finally even ready to get out of bed. He eventually recovers. One of the bullets, again, stays with him most of his life, not all its life. It eventually come out later. But this was, again, a stain on Jackson. It was a stain on the Bentons. Why are they doing this? But people just couldn't understand. This was the uncontrollable nature of Andrew Jackson. If you came after him, he was going to come after you, and he was going to come after you with a fury, and it matters often of life and death. Now, this was the last duel-like environment for Andrew Jackson in his life, but the same themes would play out over and over again throughout his military and political life, sometimes with deathly implications in the military field, where everyone had been on notice. If you come after Andrew Jackson, you better expect to get it, and then some. In his early days, it was in a form of a formal duel. Later on, it was in the formal military and political realms, but with the same vehemence as the character. This was part of the character of Andrew Jackson, the serial duelist. And that is Andrew Jackson, the serial duelist, from the life of Andrew Jackson. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicles.